lines. That is, bright lines are almost always unjustified, and they are the enemy of ethical and epistemic compromise. In ethics, this means we can't allow one moral framework or principle to trump another. We can argue about how one principle takes precedence over another, but it's not helpful to hear assertions like, it's unethical to deny an effective vaccine to a placebo recipient. Asserting that anything is unethical effectively shuts down the debate, and it also demonizes people on the other side. And I found it extremely healthy for committees not to use that word at all. There's a corollary in epistemology where we can have reasonable discussions about what we can learn and what we can't learn from randomized and non-randomized studies, but saying things like you can't learn anything from a study without randomization is both obviously not true and inimical to a balanced solution. Now, what do RCT participants know? Let's get into the issue of ethical obligations. All consent forms and consent processes are required to tell the patient or the participant in the study that the purpose is to produce scientific knowledge that benefits society, not necessarily them directly. They're also told that they trust that they won't be exposed to known serious harms not listed in the consent, and that they can withdraw at any time for any reason, and that they'll be given information arising during the trial that's highly relevant to their decision to continue. This is exactly what is in the Pfizer consent. In quite plain language, I've put it up here. I won't take the time to read through it, but it was quite explicit, and we have no reason to believe that the study was misrepresented in any way. Here in the highlighted area, you can see you're free to stop participating at any time, and the study team will tell you in a timely manner if new information is learned that would change your mind about continuing in that study, and that certainly would be an EUA. Now let's talk about, I'm sorry, skip the slide there, whether there's special obligations to placebo recipients. Obviously they have exactly the same, we have the same obligation to them that we have overall to the trial. They're free to withdraw. And because of that, the trial structure investigators shouldn't actively deny them vaccine in any way if it became otherwise available to them through a social prioritization and local circumstances. And this is consistent with the FDA position stated earlier. We'll come back to this. I would also argue that the investigators are not obligated to provide immediate vaccination in the trial before their turn of the participant is called outside the trial. First, this is not what they signed up for. And you know, there are many prioritization criteria out there by very, very good groups. And I haven't seen one that includes trial participation as a basis for jumping the queue. That is not considered a reason to get it before somebody else who might deserve it or need it because of higher risk or other considerations. But it should be reasonable when a trial participant becomes eligible through societal priorities and local ability, that they then can be provided vaccine in the trial context. So in a sense, they jump to the front of their own line. And that also binds them to the trial. It's a form of reciprocity, and it facilitates further follow-up. Now, what are some issues related to the COVID-19 context that will have relevance to these decisions? The first is the most obvious. We're in a pandemic. It's a public health emergency, which magnifies potential consequences, both positive and negative, and knowledge or ignorance and the consequences of knowledge or ignorance and of action or inaction. I would say that some rules that apply in peacetime might have to be modified in war, and we're in a bit of a war right now. But I want to focus specifically on the health risks to individuals. Given the recent numbers, not yesterday's, which are particularly terrible with over 3,000 reported dying, but those in the last few weeks, a randomly chosen U.S. citizen has an average risk of dying from COVID in the next 6 months, that is by the end of May, of roughly 1 in 1,000, and the risk of hospitalization of roughly about 1 in 200. These numbers obviously vary widely by individual, and they don't include the harms from non-fatal COVID, but they're highly ethically relevant. And let's start to talk about that. So if the maximum, if the risk of death in the U.S. in the next 6 months is around 1 in 1,000, that means the maximum benefit of the vaccine for an individual, at least with respect to mortality, is also 1 in 1,000. So, or 0.1%. So imagine if we had a drug that purportedly raised cancer survival from 40% to 40.1%. If there was more to learn, and we do have that here, that's a setting where we would typically allow many placebo-controlled trials. We see this in meta-analyses all the time with multiple trials, placebo-controlled trials of agents with therapeutic benefit orders of magnitude larger than this. So while this risk obviously has huge population impact, in terms of trial ethics, it's not the kind of risk that incurs a great ethical debt to the placebo group or prohibition on further placebo-controlled trials. Also, unlike a therapeutic drug for patients with a disease who can't change their own prognosis, many, but not all individuals can take actions that reduce their own risk of death from COVID, like masks and social distancing. So as long as there's still important things to learn about the vaccine, placebo-controlled trials should not be regarded as unethical. However, a big however, they might be infeasible. And that is a big issue because people may not be willing to either remain in the study or to enroll. But it's very important to not conflate the feasibility with the ethics. Now, in terms of the vaccine context, what we know, I'm actually not going to spend my time on this. You're going to hear, you've already heard a lot about the Pfizer vaccine. The only one I want to highlight is that if a participant wants to unblind themselves in the trial, they can, if they have the resources and knowledge about which antibody test, commercial antibody tests, would unblind them. Some of them are to the spike protein, which would unblind them. Others are to the nuclear capsid, which might not. Now, in terms of the vaccine context or background conditions, what we don't know, well, this has actually already been covered. There's a whole raft of things that we don't know yet and that we want to learn, both from continued RCTs and also from observational studies. Now, I want to outline a possible adverse scenario. If placebo participants who want vaccine when otherwise available and eligible are not given access within the trial in the name of scientific rigor, there may be many who respond to appeals by investigators not to seek vaccine, even if available to them. And to them, this argument doesn't apply. And we've seen that willingness to hang in studies with placebo controls in many other trials of even greater personal consequence. So it's not at all unlikely that there would be a sizable number of people who wouldn't do that on appeal. But some participants at higher risk will want the vaccine as soon as it becomes available to them. And if they can't get it through trial mechanisms, many will lose trust in the investigator and the trial itself, may leave the trial without further follow-up. They may seek vaccine outside the trial. And as more vaccines come on the market, perhaps they'll get another one that's available regionally with very uncertain effect. This will get a lot of publicity, meaning that recruitment to future vaccine trials will be that much more difficult because of a collective loss of trust. So some might appeal to the experimental status of the vaccine under the EUA as justification, as ethical justification for maintaining a placebo control. I understand why this has salience within the FDA, but I suspect that this distinction will not get much traction among future or current or future trial participants when literally millions of people are being urged to get vaccinated as quickly as possible. The point is that once the vaccine is widely available, or any vaccine, widely available and encouraged, the ability to maintain double-blinded placebo-controlled groups voluntarily for more than a nominal period, by which I might mean perhaps a few months, will likely not be under the control of the sponsor of the FDA. And some efforts to do so could undermine future trials as people don't trust that their interests will be watched out for. Now, I want to mention an important countervailing view, which is that many people out there, as we well know, are very wary about an expedited approval process and refuse a vaccine that they believe to be under-tested. They want to see those trials going to their planned end, but unless these people can be found and are willing to enroll in placebo-controlled trials, the argument about the feasibility of the trials still holds. Now, what's the Pfizer proposal for continuation? Now, it implicitly recognizes this reality, and it's consistent with everything I've discussed so far, except in one important regard. First, they propose urging as many people in the trial to stay as long as possible, which I think is the right thing to do. For placebo recipients who become eligible according to local or national recommendations, that's an important condition, and who ask for the vaccine, they propose unblinding them and vaccinating. For those who stay in the trial blinded, it's proposed that everyone be vaccinated after 6 months and followed for an additional 18 months to the trial's planned end. This is coupled with a robust observational pharmacovigilance plan for long-term safety monitoring that augments what the FDA and CDC are doing. While not unreasonable, I think that we have to remember that this design will not only unblind placebo recipients, will also unblind vaccinated participants who make the same request, because of course they won't know. And once unblinded, risk behavior can change. Many of the benefits of randomization within the trial are lost. So is there an alternative? And I would say there is and should be considered. There are two. And let's talk about those designs. One is called deferred immunization, also protected by the randomization. As I mentioned, the second design is active control. At some point in the evolution of vaccine testing, we may no longer be able to conduct placebo-controlled trials of any type in settings where vaccines are available. Although it's not a question to ask. You have to have both conditions. That's the point where a blinded crossover occurs. Because every participant is ultimately assigned to the vaccine arm at some point, this design actually, in some situations, in very plausible situations, can have greater or equal power to detect the duration, the sustenance of immunity more than a standard 50-50 argument. Informative and potentially more informative than one with broken randomization, particularly in combination with observational studies of the population that we've heard about today. By reducing the ethical tension within the trial and by retaining the trust in trial testing system, it provides a way further for future studies of other vaccines. So none of these are the last words on this very difficult and complicated subject, but for today these will be my last words. So I hope this will be helpful to you, and I welcome your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Goodman. You've given us a lot to think about and to discuss. I just wanted to start by raising one question. With the blinded crossover design, when would that take place? When an individual becomes reaches the priority listing for their group, or would that be at the time of issuance of the EUA?
So this is a subject of tremendous controversy and discussion. For the reasons I've already outlined, I don't think it should be, and this is my opinion, at the moment of the EUA. I think because otherwise they are jumping the queue, and I discussed that earlier. I believe it should be when for those subjects, they come up on the social priority, they come up as they would come up in terms of priorities for the vaccine, and it's available to them in their area. That is, they can get it outside the trial. As soon as they can get it outside the trial, then this would kick in, because we want to keep them in the trial. If it's given at another time, we're basically giving them priority over other populations that have been deemed to be at greater risk or greater need. And the price I think we have to pay by compromising the trial, I believe, would be too high. And we don't have, again, I made this argument earlier, I don't think we have that special obligation to give them the vaccine immediately. Those are my views.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll defer questions about how feasible this is to the sponsor after the sponsor's presentation. Next, yep. Dr. Levy. And please unmute and show yourself if you'd like.
Sorry, that was an error. I don't have a question.
Okay, Dr. Meisner.
Go ahead, Dr. Meisner.
I guess I answered all questions.
All right. Should we go to the next one?
Yeah, Dr. Chatterjee.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Goodman, for your presentation. It was certainly thought-provoking. I have a question with regard to the current study participants, by reviewing the documents, the briefing documents, it appears that there's a difference between participants who received the active vaccine versus placebo recipients in terms of adverse events that they experienced. And so there's a potential that people who are participating in the trial can actually, guess which arm they were randomized to.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, so is there then a possibility that those who believe that they were placebo recipients might wish to withdraw in greater numbers, and that would then compromise the study as well?
Again, if they are, it absolutely could. So even going forward, it could, and that would be an issue for the statisticians and for the FDA. The point of this particular proposal is this would give them an avenue not to withdraw. That is, stay within the trial under these conditions. Now, if they didn't want to wait for their allocation to become available and their eligibility locally, withdrawing wouldn't do them anything. It wouldn't get them the vaccine any earlier. So there would be no motivation to withdraw. And also, I do think that the majority of people who signed up for these trials did so in good faith and with altruistic motives. I do believe that the vast majority want their contribution to produce a valid scientific result. So I don't think self-interest completely in any way dominates. And again, yes, I do believe that there's a fair amount of unblinding just due to reactogenicity of the vaccine, and obviously non-reactogenicity of the placebo. But this, again, at the time when they might be able to get the vaccine outside the trial, this would give them a way to still contribute to the science of the trial without leaving. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, that did, and I was thinking about the people who would meet the priority criteria. Obviously, they must be the ones who would want to withdraw if they thought they were in the placebo arm.
Correct, and I do believe that's what I said. I do believe that could happen.
We've got a lot of questions. I think and what we're going to do is I'm going to ask all the speakers to please be available during our discussion, because we may have additional questions that come on up at that point. I'd like to move on to Dr. Kurilla, please.
Thank you, Arnold. A great presentation. So the blinded crossover design looks quite feasible. However, the caveat is that it does take longer to get to the answer. Did I hear that correctly? That's number one. But would we also be facing a first mover effect where this would basically dictate future trial design short of any vaccine having a full BLA going forward? So everyone else will have to consider this option as a de facto approach.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's why I emphasized that. I'm sorry, I see you talking, but I don't hear you. I'll just answer what I heard. I can't judge exactly what will happen in the future because fact patterns are going to change. So I hesitate to predict too much. It is possible that this might represent, as we go forward, a default design that reduces the ethical tension of these trials as vaccines, as I mentioned, become available in the area of potential enrollees in the trials. And what we then be asking them to do is not completely deny themselves a vaccine which they could just go out and get if they themselves are eligible, but just defer it for a few months. It might be 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and that might be less of an ask. I can't say whether it will become the default. Again, it's going to be a while for enough vaccines of any type, no less just this one, are rolled out, even in the U.S. Remember also that these trials are going on all over the world. So the U.S. Places where they will not always be occurring in places where vaccines are otherwise available for quite a while. So it is possible we might evolve. I mean, I do see that there's going to be a staging where there's going to be a point or places where we cannot any longer do the placebo-controlled randomized trial. We might move to this, and then ultimately, as I said, and it might be a year or two from now, have to move to active controls. That's the evolution I see. Whether you're committing to this design going forward, harder to say. That's very complicated. And again, it's going to depend a lot on vaccine distribution and what we learn about these vaccines. If there start to be safety signals that we're not seeing right now, that could change the dynamic dramatically.
Thank you.
I'm just going to allow one more question because we have to start at noon, which is difficult to. So, Dr. Will be the last question, and we're discussion as part of. We'll really want to pick where we've left off on some of these issues at that point. So, Mr. Tubman.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciated the presentation. On the blinded crossover design, so I understand this, basically you solve the problem of maintaining blindness. You don't have to unblind, but you do lose placebo. That group, the group that's been put into that blinded crossover system, they won't have a placebo group anymore to care for purposes of.
That's right. You lose the contemporaneous placebo. That's right. You retain the value of having had a placebo at the beginning, though, because of the deferral, and that if there's a waning, particularly on the issue of waning immunity, obviously that difference might continue over time. So you retain some of the value of having a placebo at the beginning, but not all of the value, because things like particularly safety and other issues which might not be contingent just on the specific timing of when you got the vaccine, you will probably lose that or diminish that. You don't completely lose it. It depends on the characteristics of what it is you're measuring. There are many things we can look at still with this design, but that's why it has to be these designs coupled with the observational designs outside, which is obviously both what Pfizer has proposed, but also what the CDC and the FDA are also doing. So there's many things that can be learned outside the trial that we might have been looking to the trial to provide. Now we'll be depending more on observational designs if we move more to these trials. So we don't lose all the benefits of the placebo group, but we do lose some of them. But that may not be a practical option, which was my point.
Your position is that we should not move people into the blinded crossover design until they're eligible in their particular societal group for getting it anyway. I will say that we have gotten a lot of comments from folks who are in trials, like dozens of them, and their line seems to be, well, if EUA is granted, I should be offered it. I'm not asking to opine on that, but my question is, your view is you should wait till it decidedly their group comes up, but if EUA didn't cover them at all, because that is one of the possibilities we might talk about later, would that help in the ethical determination that, yes, they should definitely wait, because after all, EUA has not been granted for their group yet anyway?
I haven't thought through that whole chain. All I will say is that they don't, again, I mentioned this previously, I don't think they are, it wasn't part of the initial contract. They understood that they could do without the vaccine for much longer, in fact, than they probably will have under a deferred policy. And they still get priority under this plan. It's just they get it first within their own priority group. So it's not that they are not owed anything. There is a reciprocity here in that when their, in a sense, turn comes up, they get it first through the trial mechanism. And so they're not completely, they're not disadvantaged by being in the trial. In fact, they're advantaged. just maybe not as much as they might want by demanding it today. But as I said, I don't think the ethical calculus is such, and other groups have not thought it such, that they are necessarily owed that just by virtue of being in the trial. But they do get a benefit.
Okay, thank you very much. I know these are very difficult situations and scenarios that we will need to be talking about again during the first part of our discussion. I apologize also to those people who I haven't been able to call on. You'll have your chance during the discussion because there's going to be a lot that we're going to have to talk about in the first part of our 2-hour period that we have assigned this afternoon. I am not sure, Prada, when should we come back? Because I know some of the public presenters are ready to go at noon Eastern.
Prabha,
Or
Kathleen, are you
Kathleen.
there? So we're scheduled to come back at, we're originally scheduled to come back around 12 o'clock, but we still have to call in all the public speakers. So let's just schedule it for right now, as long as Prabha, are you there?
Yes, I am here. And
Okay,
then,
go ahead.
So, yeah, so we are scheduled to start at noon time. So are they all lined up now to go at noon, or do we have 5 minutes or extra to give them?
No, I need to call them in all now. So let's just, we will project to be scheduled for a 25 to 30-minute break, but we have to confirm all the OPH speakers come in. So let's, at this time, Prabha, if you agree, we'll do a 25-minute break, but we may have to extend it a little to make sure we get time to get everybody in. Okay?
Yes. Okay.
Okay, that's the guidance
Agreed.
I needed. Thank you. So we're going to try to resume around noon Eastern.
All right.
Thank you.
So thank you. So with that, we are going to take a break.
been answered, I think.
Hold on, Arnold. All right, and welcome back to the 162nd meeting of the Vaccines-Related Biological Product Advisory Committee break. I'd like to now hand it back over to Arnold. Arnold, are you ready?
I am. I'd like to welcome everybody to the open public hearing session. Please note that both the Food and Drug Administration and the public believe in a transparent process for information gathering and decision making. To ensure such transparency at the open public hearings session of the advisory committee, FDA believes that it is important to understand the context of an individual's presentation. For this reason, FDA encourages you, the open public hearing speaker, at the beginning of your written or oral statement to advise the committee of any financial relationship that you may have with the sponsor, its products, and if known, its direct competitors. For example, this financial information may include the sponsor's payment of your travel, lodgings, or other expenses in connection with your attendance at the meeting. Likewise, FDA encourages you at the beginning of your statement to advise the committee if you do not have any such financial relationships. If you choose not to address this issue of financial relationships at the beginning of your statement, it will not preclude you from speaking. Prabha.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Prabha Atreya. I'm going to conduct the open public hearing session, and I will read your names in the order, and then when I call your name, please unmute your phone and start speaking, and you have 3 minutes to complete your remarks. Thank you. The first name is Dr. Kermit Kubitz.
To the vaccine advice. Hello, these are my comments to the Vaccine Advisory Committee on the BNT162b2 coronavirus vaccine. Cover efficacy, structured benefit risk, and follow-up. I have no conflicts except for a lot of elderly relatives. Next slide. The Pfizer vaccine appears efficacious based on 95% relative reduction in infections and T-cell responses comparable to human convalescent sera. See Figure 2, page 22, and Figure 4, page 24. Some uncertainty is introduced by the possibility of mild asymptomatic infection, including among placebo patients, including feelings of pain or injection site effects that may have caused more vaccinated participants to be tested than placebo recipients. Next slide. Benefit risk. I have reviewed the available evidence, and as a Caltech graduate, despite the uncertainties, the structured benefit risk of Pfizer-BNT162b2 is very positive. The coronavirus, as we have heard, is a serious medical condition with 3,000 daily deaths. While there are therapeutics, there are no prophylactics against COVID-19. Even in the event of approval of the Pfizer vaccine, limited supplies will require EUA of other efficacious vaccines when available, such as Moderna or others. Benefits of the vaccine include prevention of COVID-19, after the second dose, prevention of severe COVID-19, and preventing COVID-19 after the first dose. Risks appear to be mild injection site pain, fever, or fatigue. Increased reactogenicity for recipients over 55 is more than offset by the benefits of preventing COVID-19 cases in older adults with weaker immune systems. I note that allergy-susceptible persons should be informed of any issues in the EUA fact sheet following approval. The net benefit is highly positive. I would recommend the vaccine to my siblings over 80 and my relative in an assisted living facility where there have been 3 cases for staff and 3 cases among residents. There is a need for follow-up of vaccination effects, including how long after immunization patients are protected, whether the vaccine prevents infections which cause further transmission, and how any violations of cold chain supply, dilution, shaking, or administration affect efficacy. Thank you, Dr. Fink, Dr. Gruber, Secretary Azar, Dr. Hahn, and Dr. Messonnier. They need this vaccine yesterday.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next speaker is Diana Zuckerman.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Dr. Diana Thank you. I'm Dr. Diana Zuckerman, President of the National Center for Health Research. Next slide. Our center scrutinizes the safety and effectiveness of medical products, and we don't accept funding from companies that make those products. My expertise is based on my postdoctoral training in epidemiology and as a faculty member and researcher at Vassar, Yale, and Harvard, and also previously a fellow in bioethics at Penn. I've also previously worked at HHS and the U.S. Congress. Next slide. Today I'm going to focus on 2 major concerns on how we can improve the data that are already available. Number 1, the 2-month median follow-up is just too short to have long-term safety information and long-term efficacy information, so it's essential that the randomized controlled trial be continued. Number 2, there's a lack of diversity in COVID cases. There were 0 Black cases in the vaccine group and only 7 Black cases in the placebo group, and there were 0 cases that were ages 75 and up in the vaccine group and 5 in the placebo group. And it was very disturbing. Wall Street Journal did a chart saying that it was 100% effective for Black patients, for example. So that's one of the reasons why we need more people so we have reasonable data. Next slide. There are also too few severe cases to draw any conclusions. There were only 4 severe cases after the 2nd dose. That's just too few to conclude anything. Next slide. Long-term patients were not, long-term care patients were not in the study. There were about 800 people ages 75 and over in the study, but only 5 were cases. So we want to save their lives, but how can we ensure informed consent to nursing home patients when we have no data to provide? And how many frail elderly or their family members can make an informed decision based on so little information? Next slide. We need long-term data to fully understand if the benefits outweigh the risks for frail patients and for all races and ethnicities and for all patients. And that's why continuing the randomized controlled trial is so important. Next slide. In conclusion, the EUA is not approval, and it should have more restrictions than you'd have for approval. So FDA should require continuation of the RCT while targeting EUA to priority populations, especially healthcare workers. I agree, don't let anyone in the placebo group jump the queue. Second, EUA should not allow off-label use for non-priority groups, whether they're celebrities or anybody else. Off-label use could potentially occur under FDA's expanded access program. And last, FDA should delay access to vaccines by the placebo group unless they are in the priority populations. And I am concerned that the blinded crossover would be would be informative if the vaccine is not long-term efficacious. But if it was efficacious long-term, we would lose that information in a blinded crossover. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today.
Great. Next speaker is Peter Doshi.
Hi, this is Peter Doshi. hopefully can hear me. Thanks for the chance to speak. For identification purposes, I'm on the faculty at the University of Maryland and a medical journal editor with the BMJ. I have no relevant conflicts of interest and no one's paid for my attendance. Slide 2, please. My experience has been that careful review of a large trial takes considerable time and effort. As FDA has already reviewed the data, I'd like to know whether FDA is confident in the data collection for the primary endpoint, specifically that any unofficial unblinding did not affect the results, and that fever and pain medications did not mask symptoms, thus preventing case detection. I didn't find answers to these questions in the FDA's briefing documents. Slide 3. The dramatic difference in rate of side effects between vaccine and placebo raises questions about how well these trials could be observer blinded. With a subjective endpoint like symptomatic COVID, blinding is important, but it seems fair to think that people could make reasonable guesses as to which group they were in. Slide 4, please. In the real world, the mantra has been to test, 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 but this wasn't the case in the trial. The study protocol says in the 7 days after vaccination, do not test unless, in the investigator's opinion, the clinical picture suggests COVID rather than vaccine side effects. This basically amounts to asking investigators to make guesses as to which intervention group patients were in. My question is, was this kind of judgment ever applied in the days it could affect the primary endpoint? And now I'd like to skip to slide 6 in the interest of time. Possible unblinding would matter less if the trials had been designed to directly test the vaccine's ability to reduce deaths, ICU use, and hospitalizations, as most people assumed the trials were set up to do. So it's great when the data look encouraging, but trials should be directly testing the endpoints that matter. Then there's the duration of protection issue. A vaccine that delivers a 95% relative risk reduction of COVID 2 to 3 months after vaccination is one thing. But for the many people who lack natural immunity and don't get exposed to the virus soon after vaccination, protection needs to last much longer. After 6 months or a year, will the vaccine still meet the FDA's 50% effective requirement? The trials just don't have sufficient data to say. Keeping the trials going with placebo-controlled follow-up will help answer the many crucial questions that remain. For those that do not wish to wait for clear evidence that benefits outweigh risk, an expanded access program can be set up. Access doesn't require authorization. And I just want to end by saying that whatever FDA ultimately does, the full trial data must be made publicly available. Thanks for offering me the time to speak.
Okay, the next speaker is Rasi Hassad.
Thank you. Thank you. I am Rasi Hassad, a professor at Mercy College with expertise in epidemiology, statistics, and mental health. I hereby declare no known or potential conflict of interest. Next slide. This vaccine is reported to have an impressive overall efficacy rate of 95%, consistent across key demographics. However, the primary efficacy endpoint of the trial was symptomatic COVID-19 infection. Participants who may have developed asymptomatic infection were not identified in this trial. Therefore, if as expected, an emergency use authorization is issued, the spectrum of COVID-19 infection that this vaccine is efficacious against must be emphasized. Next slide. Adequate statistical power is necessary for differentiating between an actual vaccine effect and one that occurred by chance. The power of this trial was calculated at 90% to detect an overall effect of vaccine efficacy and may not allow for firm conclusions regarding subgroup differences. Next slide. As reported, there were no serious safety concerns, which is quite reassuring. However, there were frequent mild and moderate adverse effects, which are recognized as common side effects of vaccines. Next slide. Additionally, participants were blind as to whether they received the vaccine or placebo. But given the common awareness of vaccine side effects, unintentional unblinding may have occurred, and this can potentially inflate estimates of vaccine efficacy. Next slide. In conclusion, the potential benefits of this vaccine outweigh the identified risks. Therefore, I support the issuance of an EUA with the stipulation that the vaccine can protect against symptomatic disease. But at this time, it is not known if it prevents infection and transmission. Contraindication for those with a history of severe allergic reactions is plausible and should be included in the EUA as well. The continuing need for non-pharmaceutical interventions, particularly mask wearing, should also be noted. Finally, ongoing monitoring of this vaccine is imperative. Thank you.
Okay, the next speaker is Yvonne Fine.
Hi, my name is Evan Fine, and I'm a phase 1 participant in the Pfizer and BioNTech vaccine trial that was conducted by researchers at NYU. I have no financial or other conflicts of interest to disclose. I'm speaking today because after conversations with friends, family, and coworkers, I thought it was important to share my experience in this trial and to do my part to help ease people's fears about the vaccine. I think I got a real vaccine and not a placebo because of mild adverse effects such as fever, chills, and pain in the injection site after the second injection. After reporting the side effects, I was called repeatedly by the doctors and researchers at NYU to see if I was okay, and I was. Nothing felt rushed, and I never felt like a guinea pig. The question that everyone asks me is, well, what happened in the long term? Are there any long-term side effects? And it's been more than 5 months now since my first shot, and I can happily report that there are none. Since I've participated in the trial, I've helped out my older parents, I've gone to work in person, and I've exercised in small groups, and I haven't gotten COVID-19. I also want to emphasize that these activities do not represent changes of behavior that would alter the integrity of the clinical data. These are life activities that I have to do anyway. Not all of us are able to lock down and stay at home indefinitely. I'd still do my best to follow health rules and safety precautions. I understand the concern about whether or not people will trust the vaccine, but there will always be some holdouts. Most Americans will take the vaccine voluntarily as long as we're honest, don't talk down to them, and treat them like autonomous adults. But right now, demand for the vaccine exceeds the supply. The skepticism of some does not justify delays for others who desperately want to take it. The best way to get people to take the vaccine is to lead by example. I don't think that the problem was that this vaccine was rushed. The issue is that other important innovations are slowed down too much by delays in scheduling, lack of funding, and other bureaucratic rules that do little to enhance safety protocols. If Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, or anyone else has an RNA product that can immediately help people with cancer, dementia, or AIDS, the FDA should accept the data on a rolling basis and work with these companies to get to and complete phase 3 clinical trials within a year or two. 5 to 10 years for these trials is simply not good enough. Pfizer has just set the gold standard for future clinical trials. Let's live up to this. Now, this is an emergency, and the burden of proof is on those who don't want to authorize the vaccine. Absent compelling reason not to authorize it, it is simply immoral and unethical to deny the vaccine to healthcare workers or first responders who want it. An EUA must be granted, and it must be granted tonight. As of yesterday, the daily death toll for COVID-19 exceeds the death toll on September 11, 2001. Delays on December 10th will mean more death on January 10th. In the words of Todd Beamer, let's roll. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Angela Rasmussen.
Thank you for allowing me a few moments to speak. I'm a virologist and affiliate at the Georgetown Center for Global Health Science and Security. I'm also, I have an advisory relationship with Siemens, but I have not been compensated to appear today. I'd like to offer some comments on how serology testing might better inform our knowledge of how these vaccines are working after they are rolled out to the public. So this expedited process has moved considerably faster than the typical vaccine development timeline, and as such, we are inherently limited on the breadth and scope of data that's available on duration, durability, and effectiveness of the immunity, as well as the variability of different vaccinees' respective immune responses. Due to exclusion criteria in the clinical trial itself, there's also limited data available on minority and underserved populations, as well as pediatric populations, pregnant women, and the elderly. And we don't really know a lot about how these broader populations will develop antibodies to the vaccines. With the limited supply of vaccines, at least initially, it's going to be really critical to determine who has already been infected with SARS coronavirus 2 in order to conserve the vaccine for equitable access for others in the same priority category. Because this rollout will be so highly visible and pivotal, we really need to address potential problems such as outbreaks in nursing homes, hospitals, schools, or at other at-risk populations due to a failure to seroconvert. And serology testing could really help limit all of these issues. Next slide, please. Serology testing could help at different phases also before and after vaccination. So prior to vaccination, serology testing could assist in prioritizing individuals for vaccination, as I just mentioned, also establishing a serological baseline in the population, and help ensure that a scarce supply of vaccines initially reaches the most vulnerable people. Shortly after vaccination, it can confirm initial neutralizing antibody responses to the vaccine. It can also help ensure that antibody response clears the threshold for protective immunity. And over the longer term, 3, 6, and 9 months after vaccination, it can confirm the persistence and duration of immunity. It can also provide the means of bridging bridge trials to additional populations and subgroups. Finally, it can assess the protective efficacy of vaccination by distinguishing antibodies from vaccination versus antibodies from natural infection. So by looking for anti-nucleocapsid antibodies, you could actually determine if people who have been vaccinated have been infected after being vaccinated. And finally, annually after vaccination, we can assess better the persistence and duration of immunity. It can also inform the requirements for future vaccinations that are developed on an accelerated timeline such as this one. Thank you so much for allowing me time to speak.
Thank you. The next speaker is Jared Krupnik.
Your next presenter. Great, thank you. Before I begin, your next presenter, Dr. David Berger, alerted me that he can't get back into the conference. If you could resolve that for him, so thank you. So slide number 1, please. My name is Jared Krupnik. I'm the president of Uniting for Action and the founder of the Vaccine Considerations Project. I don't have any conflicts of interest to share. Slide number 2, please. As you can see, the Vaccine Considerations Project has been created to highlight health and safety throughout the COVID-19 vaccine evaluation process. I want to acknowledge and thank the incredible team behind all this work. Thank you, Dr. Eric Brown, Dr. David Berger, and our incredibly talented, committed, and rapidly growing team of graduate students. Slide number 3, please. I don't have to tell you about the challenges this committee and this agency have been facing. You're living those challenges. I'm bringing up the challenges to highlight that amid all the different reasons for vaccine hesitancy, what remains universal is that widespread concerns must be adequately addressed in order to ensure sufficient buy-in by public health experts, medical professionals, and the public. Slide number 4, please. You're seeking to establish trust and confidence in any vaccine you authorize and in the evaluation process by being rigorous, comprehensive, and transparent. There are limits to what can be addressed in a meeting. We're working hard to help you expand those limits. We're creating new ways to organize and share information. Here you can see how we've thoroughly analyzed the transcript of your previous meeting to extract specific concerns expressed by each individual committee member. We're providing the link to our website, vaccineconsiderations.com, where the full process transcript is available for anyone to see. Slide number 5, please. As you can see on this slide, our team has plotted specific concerns from specific individuals to develop a matrix of concerns. By plotting each concern as a row and placing each of the committee members in separate columns, you can use this matrix to quickly and easily see which members share concerns and which concerns have yet to be addressed or fully resolved. You can use this document as a living document where each member can continue to add and update their concerns offline, and the FDA staff and other committee members can address those concerns. By making this public, things won't fall through the cracks. This reassures the public and the professionals that are relying on you. The matrix of concerns is available to all at vaccineconsiderations.com. Slide number 6, please. We're using this spreadsheet as a model to demonstrate the concept, but a spreadsheet is limited. That's why we've spent over a year programming a custom platform called Information for Action that provides this type of functionality at scale. Our team is reaching out to stakeholders all around the country, experts, organizations, and associations to build and organize the central repository of concerns. We want to invite and encourage this committee and the FDA staff to utilize these technological tools to effectively address concerns, build trust, and reduce hesitancies. If you appreciate what we've shared, we'd like to connect with you. Please reach out to us at team@vaccineconsiderations.com. Thank you. My team and I look forward to working with you.
Great. The next speaker is Mr. David Berger, Dr. David Berger.
Hello. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is David Berger. I am a board-certified pediatrician. I have no conflicts of interest. I am one of the few pediatricians in Florida who does not discharge families from my practice if they have vaccine hesitancy or do not wish to follow the recommended CDC schedule. My comments today are very mindful of the strong overall benefit our nation will get when most of us have immunity to SARS-CoV-2. Next slide, please. My presentation today is about vaccine hesitancy and steps that can be taken to increase my confidence in the COVID vaccine program. And this should be slide 3, by the way. It is very important that we see ongoing, complete transparency about the vaccine in terms of both safety and efficacy. We have seen reports that up to 50% of Americans and 30% of physicians have some level of hesitancy about COVID vaccines. We must allow for meaningful public scrutiny to build public confidence in the vaccine program. Next slide, slide 4. True informed consent has always been at the core of how I practice medicine. As doctors, we have a duty to inform our patients about the benefits and risks of any medical procedure. If a person feels she is not given sufficient information about a treatment, how can she provide informed consent? I also think it's important to respect people who have concerns about hesitancy about vaccines. I often find that hesitant families will proceed with vaccines if they don't feel that their concerns were blown off and minimized, but instead were respected and tended to. Slide 5. While there are many subpopulations that should be studied for increased chance of vaccine side effects, there is particular concern about those with pre-existing allergic, hyperinflammatory, and autoimmune conditions. The Pfizer data shows that 4 individuals who received the vaccine developed Bell's palsy, whereas there were no incidents in the placebo group. On the first day of England's vaccine program, their government had to tell people not to take the vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, if they have a history of significant allergic reactions after 2 significant anaphylactoid reactions were seen in recipients. Slide 6. It will be difficult to quickly and fully track all 50 states to find the real frequency of adverse reactions. It is important we have a strong federal program to coordinate this. Please ensure a plan for this. Please provide data for us to know if people who have had COVID infection already have an increased or decreased risk of a vaccine reaction. Please provide comparative data between the different vaccine products to determine if any brand may have more or different reactions than other brands. Slide 7. I implore you to put in place a very long-term post-vaccine surveillance program. Many autoimmune and hyperinflammatory conditions often take a while to develop significant enough symptoms for a patient to seek medical help. Slide 8. It is also important to have a robust surveillance of COVID IgG antibodies so we will have a way of knowing if immunity is waning. We need to know if what is considered a protective antibody level for COVID-19, just like we have for other vaccine titers that can be commercially tested. Slide 9. If the FDA can increase our level of confidence, hesitancy will likely decline, and the COVID vaccine program will have a better chance of success. It will take many good people to defeat COVID-19, and I hope I can help you make a difference. Next slide. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Berger. The next speaker is Sydney Wolf, Dr. Sydney Wolf, and he does not have PowerPoint.
Just like we have for other vaccine titers can be commercially tested. Slide 9. If the FDA can increase
Dr. Wolf, you can't listen to it on the... Dr. Wolf?
Yes.
Okay,
Can you hear
Wolf,
me
you
with
gotta turn
the speakerphone on?
No, yeah, you have to turn your TV off or otherwise we're going to hear the delay. So please turn your TV off or whatever you're listening to.
I will turn it off right now. It's off.
All right.
Can you hear me
Dr.
on
Wolf?
speakerphone? I'm doing
Yes, we can,
speakerphone
sir.
now.
Yes, we
Can
can,
you hear
sir.
that?
Go ahead. Yes, we can. Go ahead, sir.
I'm Dr. Sidney Wolf, founder and senior advisor of the Public Citizens Health Research Group. I have no conflicts. With the surging pandemic and interim efficacy and safety results made public 2 days ago, we now agree with the need for an EUA for Pfizer-BioNTech COVID vaccine. There's an important unresolved conflict, though. If an EUA is granted for widespread use, should the 19,000 participants in the trial who received a placebo be notified of this and be offered a vaccine by Pfizer, clearly encouraging them to stay in the trial? Similarly, should blinded vaccine recipients be told of their status, thereby encouraging continuation in the trial? What would you wish if you were subjects in the trial? As status uninformed trial participants, FDA has said that it doesn't consider availability, as you have all heard, of a COVID-19 vaccine under an EUA in and of itself as grounds for immediately stopping blinded follow-up in an ongoing trial or offering a vaccine to all placebo recipients. During the October 22nd meeting, during Dr. Dora Fink's presentation, someone asked what about the problem of retaining placebo patients post-EUA, and Dr. Fink responded, with regards to mitigating the risk of dropout from ongoing clinical trials, we do share that concern. I don't have any specific remedies to offer at this time. We've asked the vaccine manufacturers to think carefully about how they would ensure clinical trial retention. Pfizer has stated in the briefing document, quote, it intends to continue the pivotal phase 3 study with participants in both the vaccine and placebo groups as originally allocated for as long as possible, emphasize that. Nevertheless, we have an ethical responsibility to inform all ongoing study participants of the availability and eligibility criteria of the vaccine made available under an EUA. They would accommodate those trial participants wishing to leave the trial by revealing which group they are in, but they can receive the vaccine only when practically eligible, depending on the government-specified priority group and the available supply. But Pfizer's real preference, and this is in the briefing documents, is that such placebo individuals are vaccinated within the study in order that both safety and efficacy data can continue to be collected. We believe this approach will minimize the number of current participants who withdraw from the study. If you were in the trial, would you prefer being unblinded only if you wish to leave the trial to seek possibly available but needed vaccine, or being automatically unblinded given Pfizer's vaccine if in the placebo group, or happy to find out
wrap it up
to stay in the trial? Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Kim Witzek.
Yes, Good afternoon. My name is Kim Witzak, and I'm speaking on behalf of Woody Matters, a drug safety organization started after the death of my husband due to an undisclosed side effect of antidepressants. We represent the voice of families who live every day with the consequences of the current drug safety system. I am also on the board of directors for USA Patient Network, an independent patient voice advocating for safe, effective, and accessible medical treatments. Right now, the world is looking for hope, so they can get back to normal. Too many lives and livelihoods have been lost. Like many of us, we put blind faith and hope in the system that ultimately failed us. I have several concerns about rushing novel vaccines to market. The public needs assurances that the FDA's review was thorough and independent, given the process for reviewing new products usually takes 6 to 10 months. How could the FDA be as rigorous in weeks this time? Is there a process in place if there are dissenting scientific reviews within the
agency. This needs to be available, and FDA scientists need to be protected for whatever their judgment is and not be political like it has been with many of the past controversies such as antidepressants and suicide has been handled within the agency. Transparency is everything. Assuming FDA approval, then all trial data must be released and made public. This also includes the process information like Pfizer's Data Monitoring Committee, who determined it was safe. Is it public? If not, it should be. We also need a transparent process for catching safety signals and communicating with the public. It needs to be real time like we saw in the UK yesterday with the allergic reactions, and not reported in weeks, months, years later like history has shown. Post-market monitoring will be more important than ever. We really don't know what short and long-term harms are given the short duration. Will FDA be staffed to handle the large task of closely monitoring that will be needed? Like MAUDE, the medical device reporting system, which includes patient narratives in the reporting, the FDA needs to do the same for the VAERS. Narratives can help tell a more complete story than just the data without giving away important patient details. Finally, I have huge concerns with possible unblinding of placebo participants and giving them the actual vaccine, as Pfizer CEO alluded to be willing to do. If this happens, we lose our control group. In closing, I'm directing this comment to the news media. You have a huge responsibility to dig deeper, ask critical questions, and not be just an extension of the manufacturer's PR department and accept press releases like the Wall Street Journal article did earlier this week and included a Pfizer supply chart showing efficacy by subgroups where blacks had 100% efficacy. This should have sounded alarms and begged for additional questions, and then they would have dug deeper and realized there weren't a whole lot of blacks in the trial. Please seek out independent researchers, scientists, and others without political or financial agendas. Ultimately, the public is the real-world clinical trial. It is one big human experiment. The only ones that have 100% immunity in this will be the pharmaceutical companies. They get all the benefits of sales without any of the legal liability should something go wrong. I'd like to thank you for your careful consideration of my comments. I know firsthand the importance of your advisory committee work. Thank you.
Okay, the next speaker is Ms. Ligda D.
Hi, thank you. I'm from AIDS Action Baltimore and the AIDS Treatment Activist Coalition. I have no conflicts of interest. The answer to both agency questions on COVID-19 prevention and the risk-benefit ratio are clearly yes, in my opinion. Many of the issues submitted in my written comments have been addressed in the sponsor submission. One important ethical issue involving maintaining participants on the placebo arm after EUA has been discussed. I think it is very reassuring that the sponsor is proposing that the placebo participants be permitted to decide whether to remain on the placebo or to receive the vaccine within the study at the appropriate time.